In this video, I am going to show you how to enlarge the grid from your reference image onto your drawing paper and how to get the size of your overall drawing paper. So the first thing we need to do is figure out the size of the actual drawing paper that you're going to do. In order to do that, I have a little formula for you. And the way that you do this is you take the number of boxes that you have on your reference image. My reference image has 11 boxes over and 14 boxes down. So the number of squares that I have is 11 by 14 on my reference image. So on the reference image, 11 by 14. The size of my new grid, how many inches do I want to make my new grid? And that's going to give me my drawing paper. You have options for this. You can make the size of your new grid whatever you want it to be. So if I do 1-inch squares on my new grid, my overall drawing area is going to be 11 inches by 14 inches because I have 11 times 1, which is 11, and 14 times 1, which is 14. If I were to do 2-inch boxes, I would have 2 times 11, which is 22 inches, by 2 times 14, which is 28 inches, which is gigantic. So I don't want to do 2-inch boxes, but if you have a smaller reference image with fewer boxes, you may need to go with 2-inch squares. The other option that you have is to do 1.5-inch squares, which some of you will probably end up doing. So 1.5 times 11 is 16.5. You can use a calculator or just do this math in your head. 1.5 times 14 will be 21 inches. That is a decent size. If you can see this ruler, it would be about this wide and 21 inches tall. It's not going to fit on my screen here, but that's not crazy big. It's probably, it's on the big side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick with 1-inch squares for my drawing paper. So my overall drawing area is going to be 11 inches by 14 inches. This is what your overall grid will end up looking like. I'm trying to get it to fit all on the screen here. But what I also want to do is I want to add an inch border around my drawing area so that when we start to mat these, we don't cover up any of our drawing. So borders are optional. If you do want or need a border on your drawing page, which I recommend to most people, you're going to take your overall drawing size, which is going to be 11 inches by 14 inches, and I need to add a border to each side of my grid. So I need to add 1 inch to the left side and 1 inch to the right side, and I also need to add 1 inch to the top and 1 inch to the bottom. So even though I want a 1-inch border, I'm actually adding 2 inches to my overall side so that I have 1 inch on the left plus another inch on the right. And the same for the top and the bottom. So I'm adding 2 inches to each side of my dimensions so that I end up with a 1-inch border the whole way around my paper. 11 plus 2 is 13, and 14 plus 2 is 16. So this is going to be my paper size. 13 inches by 16 inches. So I cut my paper to 13 inches by 16 inches, and then I just need to measure out my border and my grid. I recommend measuring the border first so that when you put the grid on the inside, you end up where you need to be. So I am marking at 1 and 12 on mine because I'm marking an inch in. Sometimes your ruler and your paper doesn't quite go to that last mark. If you pretend like it does and just mark on your whole inch, it will make the grid on the inside of your paper correct, your drawing grid correct. So again, 1 and 12, and then I'll connect those lines together the whole way down my paper. And the same thing for the top and the bottom. 1 and 15. Again, my paper doesn't quite go the full 16 inches. It's about, this one's only a 1/16 of an inch off. But pretend like it's right and mark it that whole inch. I connect those lines together. And now I have a 1-inch border around my drawing paper. Because I'm doing 1-inch squares, I'm now going to measure 1-inch boxes on the inside. You're doing this process the exact same way that you did your 1/2-inch grid, except for instead of measuring at every 1/2 inch, I'm measuring at every 1 inch. I line my ruler up with 0 at the edge of my border, and I'm just marking every inch. It's super duper 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 important that when you're marking your grid and when you're drawing your grid, that you draw as lightly as you possibly can. We want to erase these grids at the end so that you can never see that we had a grid on there. So if you press hard with your pencil, your grid is going to be way too dark. You probably will barely even be able to see my grid on this video because I want it that light. So I'm using one of my 2H green pencils, and I'm holding it way back at the back of my pencil, and I'm hardly pushing down at all. That is going to give you the lightest lines that you can make. So I'm going to finish connecting these lines together, and then I'm going to measure in the opposite direction and do the exact same thing. The only other thing you need to do once you get your grid measured and drawn in, this is all kind of review, that's why I'm skipping the rest of it, is number your boxes. Once your grid is finished, just as in your reference image, you're going to start in the top left corner with number 1, and you're going to number your boxes across, and you're going to number them down. In the next video, I will show you how to use these boxes in order to create your contour line or your outline drawing.